Hey folks, I'm going to give people a minute or two here to get joined and then we'll get started. I've just pasted the meeting minutes / agenda doc link in the Zoom chat there for folks if they don't already have it. If people could go ahead and drop your names in the attendees list, that would be awesome. As a reminder, this is a Kubernetes community meeting. We follow the Kubernetes code of conduct, so we ask that folks adhere to that, please. After the meeting, the recording, so this is being recorded. After the meeting, the recording will be posted to our YouTube channel. I want to start, I see a couple of folks whose names look new to me, so I wanted to start just with maybe calling out, seeing if anybody wants to introduce themselves, why they have come today.
I'm happy to go first. Yep, I'm new. My name's David Lang. I work with Hannes from Pivotal and also with Jim, who will introduce himself shortly. So our interest from Pivotal is we are very involved helping Pivotal's Cloud Foundry customers keep up to date with a 9 months release cycle. And as Pivotal has more Kubernetes customers, we would like to learn about what's happening in terms of helping customers keep Kubernetes up to date, and whether there's any information that we have from the Cloud Foundry ecosystem that might be of assistance.
And I'm Jim Thompson. I'm David's pair in this effort. I'm a product lead to his engineering lead.
And I'm based in Dublin in Ireland, and Jim is in New York.
Yep.
Nice to have a second South African accent on the call, David.
Hey, Quentin.
Anybody else want to introduce themselves today? All right, well, I've got a couple things that I'd thrown in on the agenda, and obviously it's open as well if folks want to put other topics there that they'd like to talk about. There were a couple action items we had out of last meeting 2 weeks ago. The first one, survey prep. So we've talked about putting out a survey for users of Kubernetes, operators of Kubernetes, to understand where their upgrade pains are or what their desires are in terms of support, those types of things. So we'd had quite a bit of feedback on that, and Nick and I sat down and scrubbed through the response comments. And I think we have a pretty cleaned up survey. I guess I'd throw it out there for folks to review. The link is in the document if you want to put any additional comments in it. But then, Hannes, last time you'd mentioned that you might have some sort of survey designer people you know who you might be able to have a look over it, see if we have not done anything that's like bad from a survey perspective or things that we might tweak to get better results.
Honestly, I distributed the document to some people, but I did not catch up with them, so I don't know if they had actually added some comments or not, or if it's fine or not. I can try to catch up with them afterwards. So sorry, I don't know if anything happened in this regard.
In the comments on the doc, I hadn't seen any new or different folks' names, so I don't know if they'd seen it or not based on that either. But yeah, if you could follow up, that would be useful. I mean, maybe we do or don't. But that'd, yeah, I think anything that we could do in that way just to try to nudge up the quality of data we hopefully get back. Oh, and to that end also, one of the things that Nick and I noticed was we had very similar questions in a couple of areas to what the KubeADM folks had done on their survey. Oh, and people are asking on permissions. So the document is shared with the work group LTS. Let me just double check the permissions. Actually, no, it's shared with Kubernetes Dev. So if you're logged into Google and a member of KDev Google group, you should be able to comment on it. So we noticed that there are some similarities to the KubeADM survey that they did, which a number of us found pretty interesting in terms of results and similarity in some of the areas. So we kind of copy-pasted, got rid of our questions, suggested answers or checkbox, and copy-pasted in theirs, so that if we maybe are then able to have done the same question, maybe we can see some correlation between results later. Anybody have anything they want to discuss on that side? We're hoping to try to get this kind of finalized like this month still and start distributing it for feedback.
I think it should be distributed as soon as possible. Also, I would like to say that you guys shouldn't expect that many responses, because for KubeADM we got something like 130. That's a good sample size, but overall it's going to be hard to gather feedback by the community and consumers.
Yeah, one thing that I think I mean, I don't know what the design intent on the KubeADM one was, but from our perspective here, I think we're not necessarily looking for like a random sampling. So I think that we should be really reaching out and trying to get folks that we know who are operators, for example, of clusters to feed in the results.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I started the APAC time zone call. I've definitely got some people who have said already that they're interested in, if nothing else, having a rant about what they don't like. I was like, rant away, that's exactly what we want.
Lubomir, had you all like kind of advertised or pushed, or what had cluster lifecycle folks done in terms of trying to get the word out or drive a higher response rate?
So we basically decided on the survey like last minute before KubeCon. Was it Seattle? And so I sat down and wrote the questions, the initial draft. And we basically decided on the questions within a couple of days in a closed environment between all the KubeADM leads, maintainers. And we didn't expose this to the public. So we basically, 4 people edited the questions within a couple of days, and we advertised on a bunch of Slack channels, Reddit, I think Twitter, and the Kubernetes dev mailing list. And that was it, pretty much.
Yeah, I imagine we'll do the same, and then I like Nick was saying, like a bunch of sort of one-on-one reaching out to people. Yeah, Josh Burkus in the Zoom chat says he didn't see the survey. I had heard about it, but I hadn't seen the formal announcements. I'd heard like one-on-one.
I can share the link to the results in chat.
Is it too late to propose new questions?
No?
Let me just throw out 2 areas and tell me if I've missed where you're asking them. When we're talking to Cloud Foundry customers, there are 2 things. One is we struggle to find a reason why they would want to do an upgrade. You know, like their motivation. They're going to have to do some work. What's the payoff? And you would think new features, but that doesn't feature highly in the Cloud Foundry ecosystem. The only one we've found is they're about to fall out of support and not get security patches. Is anything around that being asked? I couldn't find it.
Yeah, we don't have that sort of why are you upgrading? Security fixes, broadly bug fixes, features.
May I propose a question to that effect?
Sure, yeah.
Cool. And then the second one is, what organizational constraints block you from doing an upgrade? So we see in our enterprise customer base, many customers have large change freezes where no one's allowed to do any changes, or very long periods to request a change window, up to several weeks to be allowed to do a change. Is there anything around that in the questionnaire?
Not right now, but they can be.
All right, I will propose both of those questions. I'll just put them as a suggesting, and then who should I tag? Should that be you, Tim, or someone else?
Either way, we'll scrub through it even without it being tagged to a specific owner.
Awesome, thank you.
I think we have a couple of broad questions, but yeah, I think then you can add it to the survey doc. Maybe we can discuss there if any of the questions already fall under the same umbrella.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Josh Burkus again in the Zoom chat says, I'd also like a question that covers insiderness. That is, how involved is the answer in the community? I think we'll get very different answers about upgrading from contributors versus general users. Yeah, so we were trying to figure out, like, from a design perspective, how we do that. The very first question tries to get at the particular persona of the person, and then the second one following up with their expertise relative to that persona. I don't know if that quite covers what you're looking for thinking there, Josh.
Where are those questions? I don't have access to the.
Let me, so there's a link there in the Zoom chat, but I'm wondering, so that link is shared with, yeah, that's shared with KDEV, so you should be able to access that one. The meeting agenda, for folks who haven't seen that, we need to get opened up to KDEV, and I'm having permission troubles at the moment, so we'll fix that one. But the survey link is there.
I did look at the agenda doc. It does have KDEV permissions already, so it should not be a problem. Josh, I think there is a question. The first question itself tries to ask a user if they are a Kubernetes community member, maintainer, DevOps. So we do define different roles.
The problem is that one could provide a variety of answers to that first question that still doesn't define, for example, the amount of time that they spend on Kubernetes Slack. If you follow me, I just think we're going to get, based on my experience from doing this in another project, I think we're going to get very different answers from users who are actively involved in the community versus users who aren't. Obviously, for the users who aren't, we also need to settle the how do we get them to see the survey and fill it out in the first place. But my experience has been users who are actively involved in the community are much more willing and eager to upgrade than users who are just users. Do you follow me?
Yeah, I'm curious to see how much data, and this would really depend on the volume of data we get, really, and that it's representative, but I'm curious how much that supports that, because there are a number of voices within the set of folks who are active in the community who have reasons for not upgrading as often. So one of the things that we're also talking about then within the questions is the number of clusters people run and what their sizes are. And we refined a bit on that, I think, because we saw within the KubeADM results most of the respondents were running very small clusters, which kind of led to sort of an impression, at least, it's hard to say how accurate, but of whether insiderness or not, the end goal of the cluster, was it a production cluster, or was that sort of a dev test cluster, or even a hobbyist cluster? And I think for these types of bigger picture support conversations, we need to make sure that we get like production level deployments heavily weighted, I think. And I know Kubadium's aiming for that, but it's a newer tool that's maybe not quite there yet.
So we didn't, I don't think we got a lot of responses from China. To my understanding, in China, we have big companies consuming Kubadium for production. So again, this is a very small sample size, and I emphasize on the fact that it's going to be very hard to collect the data that you actually need based on a survey. So that was my point, that you should get the survey out, and perfecting the questions can help, but in the end, it's just like a hint of what people want. And it's hard to define what people want.
The other thing that Nick and I talked about, or we're seeing sort of as a pattern in the questions that we had initially drafted, was that there's kind of two things we're doing here. One, trying to collect kind of the raw data, like what are you doing today, but also kind of like a fishing for what are your problems, what are the unknown unknowns. Like there's a lot of things that we expect from people to hear, and we're wondering, is it this way or that way, or is it both ways? But also to try and understand what we don't understand today about how people are running in production. So we've got a couple of open-ended questions at the end, and I know Kubadium similarly had an open-ended question and lots of kind of sentence form feedback there. So some of that we may have to wait and see, and then hopefully we'll get enough people also who are willing to give their email address for follow-up so that we can go back and dig into some of the details behind it.
Yeah, in my mind, I think the one of the important parts there is just that, you know, we want to give people, like I said earlier, I think we want to give people a space to rant. Like, you know, it's in this case, having, you know, people publish a bit of a screed about like what they don't like is actually going to be as useful for us as anything, because if they care enough to respond to the survey with a big rant, then that means they care enough that we should probably pay attention to what they're saying. Especially if I think that you're probably right, man, about the about Lumimeter, that there's a good chance that we won't get a big sample size, and if that is the case, then we really want the people who are, you know, if people are willing to be vocal because they're, you know, cross about things, then that's gonna that is going to be, you know, a good indicator that, you know, they probably actually do really care.
Yeah, just a warning that there is quite a bit of resistance to this idea. I'm sure most of you are aware, because it's hard. You know, it creates all sorts of difficulties, and there is some skepticism as to whether it's in fact something we want to be encouraging people to do, is have these, you know, installations that last a long period of time, etc. So unless we actually come back with, you know, reasonably compelling volume of data, I think we're going to have trouble getting the rest of Kubernetes supportive of this idea. So if we go into this thinking we're not going to get a decent volume of data back, we should probably think pretty hard about whether that's a solvable problem. Because it might render the whole exercise, not just the exercise of the questionnaire, but the exercise of this working group kind of not valuable if we come back with not enough data.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly am planning to push it out to a bunch of people. As I said, there is an enterprise meetup here in Sydney that I know, that I've talked to a couple of people sort of one-on-one that are definitely interested, including the organizer. So, and we have a meeting coming up soon, so I'll be pushing it really hard there. So yeah, I think it's going to be up to us, those of us who are active here, to do a bunch of pushing in a few channels and say, hey, if you care about the upgrades, and everyone I've talked to has some opinion about upgrades, whether it's what should be improved or how there should in no circumstances be an LTS. I'm like, that's fine. Like, we need that feedback. But yeah, I think there is a chance that if we don't push really actively, we won't get much. But I think that if we do push, we should be able to get reasonable response.
I also think that there's a spectrum of things that could be improved or changed, and so on the one end, there's kind of I want to set up a cluster and leave it for multiple years and never change it and get support. Like, that's one end of the spectrum, but there's also a lot of things kind of all the way across. So like extend support by one release so that you get 4 quarters or 1 year of supported releases. That's like a small, pretty incremental change to the way we run the project today. Or things like extend the SKU support on kubectl so that the latest kubectl works against all supported API servers. Again, that's like a fairly small adjustment that would like have test impact and things like that. Or a lot of the questions are talking about like what problems do you run into in upgrades, and so the outcome of that might not even be let's change how we run the project, but more like are there tools or improvements we can make to ease some of those difficulties. So I agree, Quentin. Like if we wanted to take the output of this and kind of advocate for like a fundamental change to the way the project manages releases, yeah, the burden of proof is pretty high. You need volume and depth. But if we're looking for ways to improve real pain points in incremental ways, I think that information could be pretty useful, even if it's low volume.
Yeah, good point.
There's an uncontroversial aspect here. Like, people are recognizing that there is a need to make some improvements, in particular, like the stuff that Jordan started spearheading, documenting what does it mean? When we like this 9-month thing is fuzzy. What does it really start to mean when you get down into the nitty-gritty details of version skew, things like that? And then what specific APIs do we need to move more up towards V1 stable? And there again, like it doesn't take a strong mass of data, but we could potentially be seeing things or tooling areas where customers have complaints that aren't on our radar. So I think those are very useful things to collect. Whether we go towards, like, even though it's in the name, this LTS thing, there's a lot of us who aren't quite sure that that's the right place to go. So even if the survey data came back like in a whole bunch of depth and volume, yes, we want LTS, I don't think that would change the perception of a lot of people in the community.
I think data carries a lot of weight. Certainly the people that I'm aware of that are strongly skeptical of this would be significantly swayed if we came back with a lot of data that looked convincing. I may be wrong, but I think that if you have no data and it's all anecdotal and I think we need this and you think we don't, then those conversations tend to go nowhere. Whereas I think we need this and here's a whole lot of data to support what I think, that's a much more fruitful, productive conversation, usually.
And that I think is the point of why we started trying to formalize the working group as well, because exactly what you said, like there'd been a lot of talk, there hadn't been data or formalization behind it, and it stalls out at that point, because if you have a strong opinion, you're going to hold your strong opinion.
I think one of the ways the survey works is that, I mean, we have a working group and we have active members, but there are a lot of people who won't be attending the working group, or the users who don't have the culture of attending SIGs and working groups. We are trying to be inclusive and trying to get their voice. I think that's where the survey would help, and also get us data on what the rest of the community is thinking, apart from the like-minded people in the room. Or I would like to say like-minded people in there.
So maybe this transitions at this point nicely into the next bullet on the agenda, talking about our formation charter, the SIGs YAML. Anything else people want to say specifically on the survey?
Before we move on, I think we should have a period where we end the questions, the survey, close the survey doc so that we can submit the survey, so that everybody is aware of it, and we should be able to close it by say end date.
Yeah, one quick comment about broadening the availability of it. So some of you may not be aware, the CNCF has now formally started promoting these, I forget what they call them, but they're kind of like mini KubeCons, small regional KubeCons. The intention being that they'll be easier for people to get to and attend, and lower barrier to entry. And I think if we go through the CNCF, we might be able to broaden the distribution of this, pretty dramatically, specifically to end users as opposed to contributors. If we go to dev or, a lot of the internal mailing lists for Kubernetes, we're probably going to be ending up hitting contributors more heavily than we want to. Whereas lots of small kind of KubeCon type events have firstly a bigger participation, and secondly, I think more end user focused.
So we've got a couple of useful comments today on a few more questions, and Hannes is going to circle back with his folks. Should we aim then to have this resolved for the meeting in 2 weeks' time, and at that point be looking to send it out? Just to time box and say we're going to get moving forward?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I'm VA for that. I think we need to get it out, and then we might have further surveys based on the data that we collect.
Yep, agreed from me too.
All right then, so the working group formation charter SIGS-YAML, the community pull 2911. So that is still sitting there because we do need sign off or agreement from community as part of the working group formation process. I've been chatting with people side channel between Slack and going to meetings from the key SIGs that we've highlighted there, just to give folks an update. So SIG CLI, we have 2 thumbs up from the leads there. SIG API machinery, we have 1 meh, and earlier we had a yes from 1, but that person has been on paternity leave, so should be circling back with them this week to see if they can formally give it the LGTM. And then from SIG Node, Derek was relatively ambivalent as well, or had some concerns just around viewing working groups often as just being talking as opposed to action, which is a reasonable concern. And then Don hadn't had much visibility into what we've been talking about, so was going to review the stuff. I need to circle back with them and see if either of them is willing to give a LGTM on it at this point. So we will see where that goes this week. And I don't know, I'm not like a political lobbyist. I feel like this is a community process discussion, and whether we get formally accepted or not, like I personally don't feel compelled, as much as I've stepped up to sort of do some pushing on organizing, to really go out there and convince people. But I don't know what other people's thoughts are. Like, is it a major roadblock if we don't get the thumbs up and thus do not formalize as a working group? Is there any reason why we can't keep the discussions going and aim for the actions that we're aiming for? I personally don't see that as a roadblock, but what other people think?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think that's actually one of the objections to roadblocks, is at least objections to working groups, is, well, why don't you just go and do this stuff and come up with some input to various SIGs. But it does, I mean, it does have some value in that you have a real name, and you know, at KubeCon you can stand up as so XYZ, working group, and you have some level of legitimacy, I think. But yeah, I think we should carry on regardless. And try
I feel like a portion of that legitimacy, though, comes from operating in an open and transparent way. And at this point, we are doing that. So we're following the Kubernetes way in terms of having public meetings recorded, posted. We have open agendas, minutes, all of those trappings of community, so that it's not just this weird thing off on the side.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there is also an option of reaching out to steering committee or SIG architecture to get their perspective on our situation.
Yeah, I think their perspective, well, Dims is here actually. I think their perspective is fairly simple. Like if there are enough SIGs that think this is a good idea, then they will be fine with it. And if you can't find SIGs that are interested or nobody thinks it's useful, then it's probably not useful.
One question that had come up in that regard over the last couple of weeks is, so we need a LGTM from SIG leadership, but if those individuals aren't as convinced of the merit, perhaps, but maybe there are lots of people in their SIG, like, is it a SIG lead's responsibility to be a representative in the community of their SIG, and to what extent, how would they weigh those people? So like, there's been a lot of people across almost all of the SIGs who have said, yes, this seems like a good idea, but those aren't necessarily the approver reviewer LGTM people. So I don't know how representative the process ends up being in the end, which is part of why I'm not sure how personally that it matters to me that we achieve the formal recognition.
Yeah. Sorry, Jordan, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's kind of a catch-22. Like, initially, we don't have strong recommendations for outcomes and sort of next steps and what we're advocating for. And so if it's just does it seem like a good idea to find out how people are using stuff and running into problems? And that seems like a no-brainer to me. The more concrete the outcomes and recommendations become, the clearer the implications for all the various SIGs become, right? And so if they're the ones maintaining these components, like, a thumbs up to go like talk to users and find out what problems they might be running into seems like very low commitment. I think one of the concerns is that a thumbs up to that is sort of implicitly saying whatever comes out of that, we're signing up to do the work to address that. And so the clearer we can be that the first step is gathering information and coming up with a list of sort of, like we talked about the spectrum, like a list of small things to big things that could address some pain points, and a promise to say, like, at the point where we decide if these are things we want to take on, we're going to come back and get buy-in from the people. Like, it's not, what you're agreeing to is not, we will sign up and do the work to do whatever we dream up out of this survey. The clearer we can be about what the initial phase is and what the next steps would be, I think the more agreement you'll get, the more willing people will be to say, yeah, this seems valuable. I don't have the time, but I'm happy to get this information and start to process it and try to think about next steps. So I know we've kind of been over this ground before, but if you want people to give the thumbs up, make it clear what they're giving a thumbs up to.
Yeah, absolutely. You stole my words, Jordan, and you said it much better than I could have. Yeah, if we are not trying to get them to do more work, essentially. This is trying to get more people to pitch in and do the things that are required for us to go to LTS. And the more we can specify, these are the smaller blocks of things that we aim to do in various SIGs before we kind of like finally brand that Kubernetes is LTS, does LTS, the easier it is going to be for us to get okay from different people. And also the okay, I don't feel that it has to be like a the SIG leads are not like, okay, this is LGTM from me versus LGTM from the whole of SIG. then they have to go poll everybody, and we have to keep it low barrier, I think, at this point.
The other thing too, like unfunded work doesn't get done. And so
Correct.
one of the things that we talked about here is if there are vendors who have an interest in seeing support lengthen or improve or change, today they are either just wishing that it would happen, or they are sort of doing it themselves, and in some cases duplicating efforts or things like that. And so a key outcome seems like it would be, if we identify additional work that needs to be done, that work has to be funded somehow. And so when we're describing kind of our vision for what comes out of this survey, or what comes out of the things we discuss here, if there are things that require work, and we're taking it to the SIG responsible for that area, saying, here's something we'd like to see happen that seems like it would address user issues, this is a good place to coordinate from the people who would benefit from that, like vendors and people who would be consuming that, to say, well, if you want to see this happen, this SIG doesn't have bandwidth. They say they need 2 people or 3 people dedicated to this. Who's going to step up and do that? And so we're not just asking people to do more work. We're saying we're trying to identify useful work and then give a coordination point so that people who would benefit from that have a place to coordinate and actually contribute. So kind of holding that out as well, saying we'd like to identify useful things and help facilitate vendors or people who would benefit stepping up to do that work.
Right. I mean, one example I can give you is like we are doing really well with defining roles in SIG release, right? So if we have a role that's kind of well defined for taking care of test failures and say that this is a template that different SIGs can use for their own, monitoring their own CI builds. And making sure that they don't fall over because we are promoting different versions of Pro, and there's always something or the other breaking every week because of changes made in the main Kubernetes repository. So if we define roles that they can post jobs for, that will help them become more efficient, and it will also help us go towards LTS, because once we stop the breakage of jobs for like the last couple of releases and adding a new release and going from 9 months to 12 months, it's going to make things like that easier for them. Right now, if we go and say we need to patch something up from 1.10, 1.9, and people are going to say, forget it. We are not going to go deal with copyright issues. Remember that problem? So things like that will become easier, I think. So we have to start doing these little stuff in addition to the other things that we're talking about, like the survey.
I think I'd like to highlight this. During the SIG node, I remember that the objections were coming based on the concept of working group versus the current context of this working group. So the comments came out like the working group look at, say, working group X, I wouldn't name anything. There is a lot of discussions, they are dying out, but no real work is coming out. So it was, the objections from SIG-Node came more from a perspective of the working group itself, rather than this particular working group. So in those situations, I think maybe there should be some kind of a guidance from, what should be done.
So basically, we have to prove our worth, right? If we go with some stuff that people can quickly adopt and use, then they will say, okay, fine, this working group is doing stuff that is going to help us, so maybe we should participate more as well.
It really does sound like there's quite a catch-22 here, where we need an output before we can get the charter PR merged, but we need the charter PR merged before we can get an output.
No, you don't need a charter merged for us to go influence other people. Even when it is in progress, we can continue to do stuff. So, and like we were talking before, even if it doesn't get thumbs up from everybody else, the group can still continue.
Working group aside, anybody can propose a KEP, for example, and indicate the SIGs for stakeholders on that and drive it forward.
Right. We are also looking at one more entity which we haven't named yet, like birds of the feather or kind of thing, which has even lesser restrictions and more easier to bring up and shut down. So that might be another option, but let's not go there yet.
I mean, LTS is definitionally a working group unless we change the definition of a working group. I mean, it's a technical group that has a specific goal in mind.
But I think within that, the specific implementation, like one of the things as I've talked to folks about this, I mean, I can't necessarily hear it the way they hear it, but I feel like I say the exact same things that Jordan and Dims were saying to folks, and of course now there isn't the track record to prove like that it's not just words, that there is going to be us pulling in vendors and resources and manning specific things and driving concrete improvements, but there's that sense there that, okay, I hear the words you're saying, but I also hear you saying LTS and talking about moving to LTS, and I know that is going to mean work for me. No matter what you say, there's going to be stuff that comes from that. So I think that there's going to always be a certain resistance to that because of what's built into that phrase, long-term support. There's so many implications and assumptions that people are going to have because they've seen it elsewhere. So I guess we'll see where it goes, but it seems like kind of the consensus here is like we don't need to worry about that. That can kind of keep going. That there's plenty of other, whether SIGs or working groups who've sat there. Like, I mean, cloud provider was talked about for, was it a year or two before it came into existence? Now, working group is supposed to be time boxed. We shouldn't be talking about it for a year or well, two, but like we've talked about trying to do some concrete things this year. So it seems like people are okay with that, just kind of going at its pace. So then we've got
Tim, before we leave that, one final brief comment about you asked about if a SIG lead is not representing the views of the SIG. I think that's what I understood you to be commenting on, the potential for cases where the majority of the people who are part of that SIG have opinion X, but the lead has opinion Y and is therefore not prepared to endorse opinion X. The mechanism for resolving that, I can quite believe that might be the case in some SIGs, and the mechanism is to go to the steering committee and say, I don't think the leadership of the SIG is representing the interests of that SIG, the majority of the contributors. And people can disagree or agree with you, but that's what you would have to do.
And to be clear, I was not intending to assert that as much as that it's ambiguous. Like there are people in each of the SIGs who are interested, but the SIGs also have to weigh like all of that staffing and all of those reasons to where they are. I do think they are representing the whole of the SIG.
Right. Also, in the couple of meetings that I did attend, Tim, it was more about like you were coming to us with something. I have to go back and talk to other people and come back to you. Was the kind of response. I don't know about myself. I have to go talk to the rest of the people in the SIG. So it was not like, okay, they are telling me something, but I don't want to do it. It wasn't.
Yeah, and I think if I wasn't clear on that, yeah, I hadn't heard. Nobody has said no. There are people who are ambivalent or skeptical, but at the same time, if ambivalence or skepticism turns into no LGTM, that is a blocking thing on the creation.
Yeah,
it is effectively a no. But like we just discussed, keep going, show the track record, and people will see that and react. And even if they don't, if the work is done, the work is done. Doesn't matter whether it was a working group or a BOF or individuals who did it. So to that end then, we've got 15 minutes. I want to move on to talking about doing some specific things. We've got a big list that came out of the initial things that Jordan was pushing into the docs website. So there's 8 bullets of follow-up discussion topic ideas. only one of which I think has an associated issue or PR next to it. So I wanted to talk about starting to move towards work. So Jordan, do you know, so since this merged and I think it's just sat there, the pull 11060, have any of those things had issues opened up but not reflected in terms of edits of that description, or
There
do you
are
think that,
no follow-up changes proposed yet. Some of those I was going to open as issues and assign out to the relevant SIGs. So SIG node around kubelet upgrade process. One issue is spawned for tracking dependency versions, so like etcd version stuff, and I think that got linked to that pull. So if you look in GitHub, you can find the thing that referenced it. Yeah, so there are not issues open for most of those yet.
would it be?
We should we should also have the umbrella issue open, Jordan, so we know.
Yeah, I can open those very quickly. That takes like 10 minutes. So
yeah, thank you.
I will take an action item to get an umbrella issue open and open those individual ones so that we can kind of focus the discussions instead of having 1,000 people tagged into one issue. I will do that today. And
I didn't mean to put it on you. I was going to volunteer to do it also if you preferred. Or
I can probably complete it before we finish this meeting if you want to talk in the background.
I don't need to talk. Doing enough already. So link in the meeting minutes there, if folks look at the bullet list, are there things that people see is additionally needed beyond that set?
I did have one question about where the best place for sort of the third-party dependencies, tracking that version stuff, where the best place for that is. I guess the two most obvious places would either be in a single document on the website or in the sort of release notes or something that is per release. And so I wasn't sure. So that right now the document is version neutral. It sort of does everything in terms of like version n and n-1. And so it is intended to be correct no matter what version you're referring to. As we start documenting specific dependencies, that's going to change over time. And so like a table or a matrix sort of gets unwieldy once you have more than a couple versions. Or it has the potential to. So I wasn't sure if we wanted to tack it onto this document or make it per release or what people's thoughts were. And this is kind of SIG release level stuff or SIG testing. Like both of those have opinions about like what we test and what we support. So what do people think would be a good destination?
From the SIG release perspective, this is something we've been beating up against on every release, and none of us are happy with how it goes. I think that we split into two aspects there. One, like what are we doing for this release, and two, what is the big picture intent? Is the whole splitting, we get into the splitting the monolith and what is a distribution, what is Kubernetes discussions, and we bike shed and rat hole on that. So there is an open issue in SIG release around better formalizing the process of collecting the dependency list for that release. And I believe, yeah, it's marked milestone 114, so it's something that Aaron is looking to improve this time around for 114. But still, that's just the this time around, every 3 months, what do we have? And I don't know that.
Okay, and I think this list is bigger than people realize at first. Like, and people think, oh, third-party dependencies, etcd, container runtime, container network interface, container storage interface. And then maybe some specific implementations of the container runtimes that we test with. Like, oh, we've got like 5 or 6 things to document versions of, but if you actually look at like the release notes and look at all the add-ons that ship as part of a Kubernetes release, it's a long list. And
there's 30 plus and 113
yeah,
listed, I
and
think.
I'm pretty sure that doesn't include everything that's actually bundled.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't think just plopping it into the middle of this document is going to be useful or comprehensible over time.
I have a comment here quickly. Somebody brought that there's a problem that we don't have this as machine consumable as well. So perhaps we should do it somewhere in KK and basically create a machine consumable list, and people who bump versions have to touch this file as well.
Mm-hmm.
But
a lot of them are in files. One of the things that when this first came up, like I think it was the first time I saw it as an issue is in maybe the 110 release. On the day of release, the changelog or the release notes person said, "Hey, we didn't update this list," and we did a quick dive to go find the versions, and we came up with a list of 20 or 30 things that were culled from 20 or 30 different source files. So like that. And then some of those we found to be conflicting between different areas of test or test and code and integration and build release. So getting it machine readable in a single place would make a huge difference, I believe.
One problem with the single file, we basically face this problem with the reference documentation that we generate for kubectl and kubeadm, is that we face the approval problem where only a few people can approve this file. So
the other one is, where is the file?
I mean,
once you decide where it is, you can have an owner's file, and you got to decide who's in the owner. But once you pick a place to put it, then all of the different things that depend on it need to actually pull that repo out also, which can lead to problems.
I mean, first of all, it can be a separate repo, and also a lot of people can be added in the owner's file as long as there are SIG chairs. I just don't want this file to be blocked on 5 people or something.
Shouldn't this be a SIG release specific? I mean, because the whole audience of SIG release would be interested in commenting on this.
But the people who will touch that file are every SIG. I think initially SIG release would like to have a better handle on it in knowing and propagating the information at release time, but SIG testing especially would be a key consumer initially, just to see that test cases are actually using that instead of other sources of data or duplicated sources. Because that was something else we found where version X was specified somewhere in code and somewhere else. Like the whole etcd thing, like we say we want, was it 310 or higher at some point, but we found a bunch of tests that was still on 2.
I was just going to ask, it seems like we have 2 conflicting requirements. The one is that we want to be able to go to a single place and find out what the canonical set of versions is. And the other one is that we want to be able to maintain that thing efficiently in the right places. And the first of those seems to sort of imply a single document that is the canonical truth. And the other one seems to imply like multiple documents managed by different SIGs. Presumably certain components are kind of the purview of certain SIGs, and those SIGs should be able to decide what the canonical versions are for the things that they control. So isn't that mechanically an appropriate solution, is to say there is a single place that points to all of the places where the versions are kept. Those are maintained by the SIGs that look after the versions of those particular components. And it is machine readable by traversing this tree that is maintained in a distributed fashion.
I think that makes sense. As we split more and more out of KK, these types of federated single sources of truth, if that's, I don't know if that's an oxymoron or what, but it's going to be an increasingly common pattern that we're going to need mechanisms for coalescing information from a standardized data format in all the places, I guess.
So I just have this question about how this will function. So we just discussed the proposal and a couple of designs of how we should implement this. So how does this get spread? And right now it's only in our meeting notes. Would this be something that we say is part of the proposal that we come out with, or so is this something that we should be part of the CAP, or do we go back to SIG release and say, hey, we discussed this in working group and hey, something that we need? How do we make the best use of what we have already discussed and save this somewhere and share this with others and use it?
So first of all, if it's machine readable, we can use a tool to generate the release notes automatically. It can also link to the PRs that implemented the bump of a version. And at the same time, we had requests that people do not know what is the actual etcd version for this particular release of Kubernetes, unless they look at the source code. So that's a problem. If we have this in some sort of a JSON file or YAML, consumers of Kubernetes will know what is the bound version for this release.
Yep, Lubomir, I get the perspective. I just wanted to say that it's a +1 from me. It's just that we have discussed a couple of designs now. I wanted to understand how, in general, other SIGs or other working groups or steering committee, how do we save this knowledge that we have all discussed today, and how do we share it with everyone?
So I think that we've got the issue that I linked for SIG release that's about how the release team collects the information, but that's partly just kind of Band-Aid, like, because we know we're not happy with the state of where the information is, right? So telling a person how they go out and munge this stuff together is one thing, but I think we need a SIG release issue, and I'll go ahead and open one, assuming people agree that that's a reasonable place to do it, to track formalizing that consistent way of collecting the data.
So right now, the way I helped with the release notes for the last release, I basically opened the old release notes, looked at the PRs, looked at the files that the PRs touch, and then saw the latest bumps and extracted the latest versions out of like the PRs that touched the version updates. And it's a kind of tedious process, and we need definitely automation around this.
My feeling is, but I think kind of going back to what others have said, that if we make automation that scrapes a bunch of files with arbitrary format data in them, that we're doing that wrong, that we want to come up with a more structured, consistent way across repos.
So if there is a name of a component and next to it is a tag or a version, I think that a human should bump this tag, and it should be in this JSON file. And at this point, it's machine readable but human writable. That's how I see it, at least.
Yeah, makes sense. And there with the normal community process on the right side. So we're up at the top of the hour pretty much. I just wanted to mention that I did submit in the CFPs for KubeCon Europe, just a kind of mid-year presentation status report on what we've been doing, just to keep word out there and get feedback from folks in Europe. I did it as part of the normal presentation track because we're not formally a working group, so I don't see us as part of the maintainers track that's for the working groups and SIGs, but we'll see what the program committee says to that. If there's somebody who knows that they are going to be able to go to China and is interested in doing similar for KubeCon China, I think that would be really good to do. I know I will not be able to.
I will also not be able to, probably.
Same here. I'm not here.
So I'll just put that shout out there. We're at the top of the hour, but if there's folks who are interested or think they might be able to, as your plans become more solidified, think about maybe stepping up and volunteering to do that. It would be greatly appreciated. Oh, Quentin says he'll probably be there, so that maybe is an option. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and
one more thing, Tim.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to mention I do run the call for APAC time zone tomorrow. I think it's tomorrow. I don't know. It's tomorrow my time. It's hard to keep track of what time it is for everyone else. Yeah, so there is an APAC time zone call. I think it works out to be 5 or 6 p.m. PST. So I'd certainly appreciate if anyone can dial into that and help. So far, I haven't had heaps of people, but I'd like to definitely keep it as a real thing. So yes, thanks. If anyone could, that would be great. Thanks.
Thanks everybody for joining and for the conversation, and keep an eye out for Jordan's umbrella issue and some tasks that we can start pitching in on. Have a great day, everybody.